What if I told you the king of rock and roll wasn't just a legend, he was a target, and everyone around him knew it except Elvis? The night was heavy in Memphis, 1974. The crowd's buzz filled the cavernous auditorium, a mixture of excitement and anticipation. Spotlights hummed faintly above, tracing the edges of the stage, illuminating the empty mic stand and gleaming guitar. Somewhere backstage, footsteps echoed against the polished floorboards, a soft shuffle that betrayed nervous energy. Elvis Presley had climbed higher than anyone could imagine. From a small-town boy in Tupelo to the king of rock and roll, he had conquered hearts across the nation. But what the public didn't see were the invisible chains tightening around him, the pressures, the manipulations, the carefully orchestrated chaos designed by those who claimed to care about him. Priscilla Presley watched from the wings, quiet, anxious. She knew him in a way the world never would, the laughter, the exhaustion, the man behind the sequins. She had tried to warn him gently at first about the forces circling him like sharks in the water. Yet he smiled, performed, charmed, and ignored her worries, believing he was untouchable. Behind the curtains, Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, adjusted schedules, approved contracts, and smiled in a way that suggested protection, but the truth was far darker. Each handshake, each decision, each new obligation was another thread in a web meant to control the king. Elvis entered the stage, greeted by the roar of thousands. The applause was thunderous, almost deafening, yet even in that sound there was a strange hollowness. He performed flawlessly, moving with the energy and charisma the world adored. But beneath the glittering facade, a tension simmered, a fragility no one dared to mention. The story that would unfold tonight was more than just music and fame. It was about trust, betrayal, and choices made in the shadows. And in those shadows, Priscilla had seen the storm forming, long before anyone else. 3 questions lingered, unspoken yet pressing. Could Priscilla's warnings reach him before it was too late? Who around Elvis could be trusted when even smiles carried hidden motives? And ultimately, was the king being pushed toward a fall he couldn't survive? The stage was set, the lights glowing, and the first note trembled on the edge of reality. Elvis's world was about to tilt, and no one in that crowd, no one in the backstage bustle, could yet see how fragile the king's reign really was. The world only ever saw Elvis on stage, perfect, untouchable, a force of nature. But behind the glittering lights and roaring applause, his life was stitched together with quiet struggles and whispered fears. Memphis, from his early years in Tupelo to the height of his fame in 1974, had shaped him, a boy dreaming beneath hot summer skis, whose voice carried him farther than he could have imagined. Priscilla remembered the first time she truly saw him alone, not as the king, but as a man. His blue eyes were tired, the edges shadowed from relentless travel, the weight of expectation pressing on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. He wore a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled, collar loose, and a scarf, soft, red, trembling slightly, hung around his neck. It was his shield, his armor, though fragile in reality. She reached for it once just to straighten it, and it shook in her hands, betraying the fatigue beneath the bravado. Backstage lights flickered low. Somewhere in the distance, a faint guitar strummed, a gentle reminder of the music that both saved and consumed him. Footsteps echoed down the hall as assistants hurried past, balancing papers, programs, and contracts that mapped out his every move. Every note of applause from earlier, every fan's cheer, was mirrored backstage by hushed conversations about bookings, finances, and obligations that never ended. Priscilla's heart ached. She had tried over and over to warn him. The people surrounding him weren't always friends. Promises made to protect him were often veiled in self-interest. She remembered whispering once in a quiet hotel room, "Elvis, don't let them pull you in too deep." He had smiled, brushing her words away with a casual laugh, convinced that love and fame could shield him from any harm. That was the fragility. He was strong, brilliant, adored, yet so vulnerable. Each night as he stepped onto the stage, he carried not just guitars and lyrics, but the weight of choices made without his consent, the subtle manipulations of those closest to him. His laughter hid exhaustion, his songs hid anxiety. All the while, the world applauded what it could see, blind to the cracks forming beneath. The trembling scarf became a symbol in her mind, delicate, beautiful, but easily torn. It reminded her of him, the man who could command thousands, yet whose heart remained exposed. Every performance, every contract signed felt like another tug on that scarf, threatening to unravel the delicate thread of his stability. And yet there was hope. Hope that he could see through the smoke and mirrors, that her presence, her love, might be enough to steer him clear of the pitfalls waiting silently in the shadows. The hope lingered like the soft glow of a backstage lamp, dim but persistent, promising that perhaps the king could survive the very system that had made him famous. The questions from Act 1 lingered. Could Priscilla's warnings reach him? Who could truly be trusted? Was the fall inevitable? These thoughts haunted her quietly, even as she prepared costumes, straightened scarves, and smoothed the creases of programs for the next show. The audience outside saw the thrill of the performance. Inside, the whispers, the trembles, the worn pages of folded programs spoke of a story far more fragile than anyone imagined. The king's reign, though dazzling, was balanced on a thin thread, and every subtle detail, every small choice would matter in the days to come. Footsteps faded into the distance, and the faint echo of applause lingered, a reminder of the world that celebrated him, unaware of the fragile man it adored. The arena was electric that night. Thousands of fans had gathered, each heartbeat synchronized with the roar of anticipation. The lights dimmed and a hush fell over the crowd, broken only by the faint hum of the spotlight tracking across the stage. Elvis stepped into that glow, his silhouette towering yet fragile, the scarf from backstage now tucked loosely under his collar. It had been a reminder of the quiet fragility of his world, a world that seemed indestructible to outsiders, but which trembled with every demand, every expectation. He picked up his guitar, worn from years of travel and countless performances, and cradled it as though it were a lifeline. The instrument had always been more than wood and strings. It was a bridge between his public and private selves. Tonight, it would carry more weight than anyone could imagine. As the first notes rang out, precise and confident, a subtle disruption began to ripple beneath the stage's glitter. Contracts that had been hastily signed, promises made in shadows, obligations forced upon him by those he trusted, all converged in a storm that no amount of applause could temper. Every chord he struck was punctuated by a quiet unease, a tension that clawed at him from within. He played, but his fingers trembled. The crowd saw only the king performing flawlessly, yet inside he felt unmoored. Priscilla watched from the wings, a silent sentinel. She had known this tension would come. She had seen it in the sleepless nights, the fleeting moments of doubt behind his eyes, the careful adjustments of the scarf that symbolized the thin line he walked between brilliance and collapse. She wanted to step forward to speak, to shield him from the inevitable, but she knew she could not. Not here, not now. He had to face the storm, and she could only hope he survived it. The audience erupted with the next song, and for a moment the roar masked the dissonance in Elvis's mind. But it returned, subtle at first, then pressing, as his manager's whispers, staff's urgencies, and contractual pressures all collided in his consciousness. Each decision he had made or been made to make seemed suddenly monumental. Every cheer from the crowd felt like a tide pulling him further from the man he used to know, the boy from Tupelo who had sung with raw honesty and innocence. Then came the moment that shattered the performance. A string snapped on his guitar, high-pitched and jarring, reverberating through the arena. The music faltered, and the audience's collective gasp swept across the stadium like a wave. Elvis froze, caught between instinct and panic. The guitar in his hands, a symbol of everything real and personal, now betrayed him. He looked down at it, feeling a pang of grief that no stage magic could mask. In that instant, time seemed to bend. He could hear Priscilla's voice in his memory, the trembling scarf from backstage, the warning she had given countless nights before. The higher you climb, the more precarious your position becomes. He realized fully that the people surrounding him were not always allies, that the very system that had created him could also dismantle him. The weight of betrayal, obligation, and expectation pressed down like never before. He set the broken guitar aside, its symbolic power now fractured, and continued the song on an acoustic backup. The crowd, unaware of the inner chaos, responded with a thunderous cheer. Yet he felt hollow. Each note carried the weight of unseen manipulation, each chord a reminder that his brilliance was no longer entirely his own. Backstage, Priscilla gripped the edge of the curtain, a mix of fear and hope warring inside her. She had watched him rise, watched him shine, and now watched him struggle to reconcile the public adoration with the private unraveling. She thought of the scarf, the delicate threads, and of the guitar, now damaged yet still capable of producing beauty. Both were mirrors of Elvis himself, resilient yet vulnerable, brilliant yet fragile. The show pressed on, a dance between perfection and chaos. The king moved with his signature charisma, yet each step, each gesture carried the weight of the world he could no longer ignore. The audience, mesmerized, felt awe without knowing its source. They applauded what they saw while backstage the fractures deepened. Elvis's inner struggle was a quiet symphony of grief and determination. The broken guitar, the trembling scarf, and Priscilla's silent warnings became intertwined symbols of a life caught between destiny and design. He realized that the brilliance of the performance could not erase the subtle betrayals, the hidden manipulations, or the fragile human beneath the sequins and lights. As the final song ended, the arena erupted. Applause surged like a tidal wave, yet Elvis stood still for a heartbeat longer, absorbing it all, the love, the fear, the realization that the world outside could never fully understand the storm within. He glanced toward Priscilla, a fleeting look that carried everything: hope, fragility, the unspoken knowledge that the next act of his life would demand choices that could either save him or break him entirely. The night closed with the king leaving the stage, the broken guitar tucked under his arm, the scarf still trembling around his neck. Behind the scenes, the quiet footsteps, the rustle of programs, the fatting echo of applause all whispered the truth. Brilliance and vulnerability were inseparable, and the higher one climbed, the more the world tested the heart beneath the legend. Backstage, the world's roar faded into a distant hum. The applause, once thunderous, now felt like a memory floating through the heavy air. Elvis leaned against the dressing room door, exhausted, his chest rising and falling with effort. The scarf, once trembling with tension, now hung loosely, slightly askew, like a quiet emblem of the day's fragility. Priscilla was there, waiting in the soft glow of a dim bulb. The faint light reflected on the scattered papers, folded programs, and a half-filled glass of water sitting on the vanity. It was ordinary, mundane, yet it carried the weight of comfort, a small anchor in a chaotic world. She offered the glass without words, and he took it, fingers brushing hers, a fleeting touch that spoke of understanding, concern, and unspoken warnings. He sat heavily on the edge of the chair, the guitar resting against the wall, still carrying the memory of its broken string. His eyes were distant, haunted by the moments on stage, by the knowledge that brilliance and betrayal had danced together in ways he could not control. The king, who had commanded thousands, now felt painfully human. Priscilla knelt beside him, her hand tracing the edge of the scarf he wore. "You were amazing tonight," she said softly, though her voice trembled with both admiration and fear. "But you can't keep carrying it all alone." Elvis didn't respond immediately. He stared at the reflection of the dim bulb in the mirror, his mind replaying the stage, the snap of the guitar string, the applause that felt both real and hollow. The questions from earlier, the warnings, the trust, the fall, circulated in his thoughts like ghosts he could not yet face. "I know," he finally murmured. I don't know how to stop it." His voice was low, almost swallowed by the room's quiet. The glass of water, the dim light, the scarf, they all became symbols of a life he was struggling to hold together. A life full of music, love, and impossible expectations. Priscilla's eyes filled with the memory of the early days when he had been just a boy with a voice and a dream. She remembered the quiet laughter in hotel rooms, the gentle teasing, the stolen moments when fame had not yet claimed him entirely. Those days were distant, yet she clung to them, hoping they could guide him back to himself. The tension between public and private life, between adoration and manipulation, had never been clearer. Elvis had faced countless audiences, countless challenges, yet this, the realization that his life was being quietly steered toward peril, was more personal, more devastating than any performance could ever convey. He raised the scarf in his hands, fingers tracing the delicate fabric. Priscilla watched him, sensing the silent plea beneath his stoic exterior. That someone see him, truly see him, before the stage lights and applause hid everything he feared would break him. Finally, he set it down and leaned back, closing his eyes. The dim bulb flickered above, the glass of water reflected light like a small, trembling star, and the quiet rustle of clothing filled the backstage space. For a moment there was only intimacy, the fragile connection between two people who loved deeply, yet navigated a world determined to consume one of them. In that space, away from the crowd, away from the contracts and obligations, the king was simply Elvis, the man, not the icon. And Priscilla, with all her love and foresight, remained the only person who could possibly guide him through what lay ahead. The questions from Act 1 still lingered. Could her warnings truly reach him? Who could be trusted? And was the fall inevitable? In this quiet, private aftermath, the first threads of understanding began to form, setting the stage for choices that would define the rest of his life. The night had grown late. The applause from earlier performances still lingered faintly in the corridors of Graceland, but backstage the air had turned heavy with secrets. Elvis sat in his dressing room, exhausted, the scarf now lying loosely across his shoulders, a silent reminder of the fragility Priscilla had long feared. He ran a hand across his face, trying to shake off the pressure, the constant weight pressing down from every corner of his life. Then came the call that would change everything. Colonel Tom Parker entered the room, his usual confident grin slightly muted, a handkerchief folded neatly in his hand. It wasn't just any handkerchief, it was a gift he had carried for months, a symbol of control masked as care. He placed it on the vanity, folding it with precise, deliberate movements. "Elvis," he began, voice measured, "you've been doing everything perfectly, but there's more expected of you." The words sounded innocent at first, but beneath them was a plan carefully orchestrated for years. Parker's true intentions, hidden behind smiles, contracts, and carefully timed advice, were beginning to surface. Every move Elvis had made, every contract signed, every obligation fulfilled, it had all been guided to corner him, to keep him performing while someone else controlled the empire. Priscilla, standing nearby, felt her heart tighten. She had sensed the manipulation, the subtle pressures that had tightened like a noose around him, but now the full picture was coming into focus. Parker was not merely a manager. He was the architect of the fall, steering Elvis toward a path lined with expectation and restriction, where personal freedom was sacrificed for profit and image. Elvis absorbed the revelation quietly, the room heavy with tension. His hand brushed the guitar that rested against the wall, a familiar, comforting anchor. He plucked a single note, soft, almost mournful, letting the sound fill the small space. It was both a release and a reminder of what he had loved about music: control, freedom, expression. Yet the note trembled, carrying grief and disbelief. The handkerchief on the vanity became more than fabric. It became a symbol of the manipulation that had been stitched into every moment of his career. It represented the trust betrayed, the unseen strings tugged by those he had believed were allies. He realized that the applause, the fame, the adoration, all of it, had been carefully curated, each moment a step in a plan designed to shape him, rather than let him shape his own destiny. Priscilla stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Elvis, you're not alone in this," she said gently. "I've been trying to warn you, I knew what was coming." Her words were both comfort and revelation. In that moment, the second open loop from Act 1 began to resolve. Yes, Priscilla had seen the danger before anyone else, and her foresight could guide him, but only if he trusted her completely. Elvis let out a long breath, eyes closing for a moment. The reality hit hard. He had been set up to fail, caught between loyalty, love, and a world that demanded more than any human could give. The instruments, the applause, the stage lights, they had all become tools in a story where he was both hero and pawn. He picked up the guitar again, running his fingers over the strings, plucking a melody that felt raw, real, and entirely his own. Each note resonated with grief, with defiance, with the recognition of a truth he could no longer ignore. The room seemed to hold its breath as the music filled the space, a private performance for him and Priscilla alone. The handkerchief rested untouched on the vanity, a silent witness. Elvis folded it deliberately and set it aside. The act felt like reclaiming a small piece of control, a gesture of resistance against the invisible forces that had pushed him to this brink. Priscilla's eyes glimmered with relief, hope sparking as she realized he was beginning to understand the full picture. In that intimate moment, the turning point became clear. The fall that had seemed inevitable could be mitigated. Awareness, trust, and the courage to act were his weapons against manipulation. The stage could still be a place of triumph, not just performance. The music, the love, the symbols of resilience, the scarf, the guitar, the handkerchief could all become reminders of strength rather than vulnerability. By the time Elvis left the dressing room, the tension had not vanished, but it had shifted. He had glimpsed the forces working against him and recognized Priscilla as the one who had always seen the truth. The second open loop from Act 1 had resolved. Someone had warned him, someone had prepared him, and the possibility of choice had returned. The night outside seemed quieter, the echoes of applause replaced by the soft rustle of leaves and the distant hum of a city that adored him but would never fully understand him. He carried the guitar, the scarf, and the knowledge of manipulation like talismans, small anchors in a world of expectation. Tonight, he was not just the king of rock and roll, he was a man reclaiming his story. Weeks had passed since that night. The broken guitar, once a symbol of disruption and grief, had been carefully repaired. Its strings were taut and ready not just to produce music, but to carry the story of a king who had faced manipulation, betrayal, and relentless expectation, and survived. Elvis stood on the stage once more, the spotlight low, a soft hum surrounding him. The scarf from earlier performances rested lightly around his neck, no longer trembling, a quiet emblem of resilience. He lifted the guitar, feeling its familiar weight, and strummed a chord that resonated through the hall, echoing off the walls and filling the empty seats with a sense of triumph. The music was no longer a fragile bridge, it was a declaration. Priscilla watched from the wings, her heart swelling with relief. The final open loop from Act 1, the question of whether Elvis could navigate the storm and reclaim his life, was answered in that moment. He had seen the manipulation, faced the pressures, and emerged with agency. He understood now that brilliance came not from perfection but from embracing vulnerability, trusting those who truly cared, and reclaiming the narrative that had once been written for him. The fading spotlight became another symbol. It illuminated him, but also suggested the transient nature of fame, the impermanence of applause, and the enduring power of choices made with intention. The light touched his face, highlighting both the scars and the joy, a reminder that resilience and artistry were inseparable. Backstage, the quiet echoes of footsteps and rustling curtains carried memories of struggle and growth. The handkerchief, once a token of manipulation, now rested folded in his dressing room, a reminder that challenges could be acknowledged, understood, and overcome. The scarf and guitar had transformed from fragile symbols into emblems of persistence, courage, and mastery over his own life. Elvis performed with renewed energy, each note a testament to survival. The crowd, unaware of the battles waged behind the scenes, responded with fervent applause, but this time it felt different. It was not just adoration, it was recognition of a man who had reclaimed his story, a life once threatened by unseen forces, now guided by awareness, love, and determination. Priscilla stepped closer after the performance and they shared a quiet moment together. No words were necessary, the understanding was mutual. She had warned him, he had listened, and together they had navigated the treacherous waters of fame and manipulation. The lessons of trust, resilience, and insight were not just personal, they were immortalized in every chord, every note, every stage light that lingered after the audience departed. The night ended not with fanfare but with a quiet reflection. Elvis placed the guitar gently in its stand, ran his fingers over the scarf, and allowed the final glow of the spotlight to fade slowly. In that fading light there was both pride and peace. The king had been tested, challenged, and nearly broken, but he endured, leaving behind a legacy that was more than music. It was a testament to courage, love, and the power of truth. The story of that night of manipulation narrowly avoided, of Priscilla's foresight and love, and of Elvis's resilience became more than legend. It became a lesson. Even those placed in impossible circumstances can reclaim control, choose integrity, and transform symbols of vulnerability into emblems of strength. And as the echoes of the final note faded into the empty hall, the king of rock and roll stood tall, not just as a performer, but as a man who had faced the storm, reclaimed his narrative, and ensured that the story would continue, on stage, in memory, and in the hearts of those who truly understood him. Years later, when the spotlights had dimmed and the crowds had long dispersed, the story of Elvis Presley remained alive, not just in recordings or photographs, but in the quiet spaces where music and memory intersect. Those who knew the man behind the legend understood something essential. Greatness is never without struggle, and brilliance often walks hand in hand with vulnerability. Priscilla's warnings, once quietly given in moments of worry, had become a testament to love and foresight. Her insight and unwavering presence had helped him navigate a world that demanded perfection while threatening to consume him. The scarf, the guitar, the handkerchief, the dim lights backstage, all were more than objects. They were symbols of endurance, vigilance, and the small truths that preserve humanity in a world of spectacle. The applause that had once shaken stadiums eventually faded, leaving only memory. Yet in that silence, the lessons endured: to notice the subtle cracks, to trust the right people, to face manipulation and expectation with awareness, and to reclaim control over one's story. The king had been tested, yet he emerged resilient, reminding us all that even under impossible pressure, the human spirit can endure. Looking back, the legacy of that era is not only the music that defined generations, but the narrative of perseverance. Every chord struck on a guitar, every folded scarf, every careful gesture backstage became threads in a larger story, a story of love, insight, and the courage to stand firm when the world tried to dictate your path. And perhaps that is the true moral. No matter how dazzling the lights, how thunderous the applause, or how irresistible the pressure, what matters most is the strength to recognize the truth, the courage to act on it, and the wisdom to hold on to the people and symbols that anchor you. Even now, when the final note has long faded, the memory of that night remains, a quiet echo of love, vigilance, and resilience. The fading applause that once celebrated a performance now celebrates a life reclaimed, a story restored, and a legacy secured. Some moments are lightly dramatized for narrative effect. And maybe, just maybe, stories like these remind us that love, music, and memory never fade. If this touched your heart, share it and subscribe for more.